Scott Ferguson es de origen canadiense y el actual CEO mundial del World Trade Center. Su posición impacta a nivel global, ya que está a cargo de la organización que cuenta con los principales centros de negocios a nivel internacional, establecidos en más de 320 complejos en 90 países alrededor del mundo. Con más de 30 años de experiencia en negocios internacionales, Ferguson es reconocido por su capacidad para innovar y fomentar el crecimiento de las organizaciones y la prestación de servicios de educación comercial. Scott se caracteriza por su liderazgo y ejecución, aptitudes que lo distinguen una vez más como uno de los 50 principales CEOs de Norteamérica por la prestigiosa Atlantic Business Magazine. America Business Forum se enorgullece en presentar a Scott Ferguson.
Buenas tardes. Voy a decir unas palabras en español de entrada, pero seguimos después en inglés. Si esperaban que viniera Fantino o que siguiera la robot, lamento la desilusión. Mi nombre es Carlos Lecueder. Nosotros desarrollamos shopping centers, edificios de oficina y somos los desarrolladores del World Trade Center Montevideo, del futuro World Trade Center Punta del Este y del World Trade Center Ferguson. Y me toca hoy estar aquí para entrevistar a nuestro presidente, a nuestro CEO internacional de la World Trade Center Association, Scott Ferguson. Así que gracias por estar. Bienvenidos. Hello, Scott. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I try to speak the best English I can.
Well, your English is far better than my Spanish, so.
Okay, thank you. We were speaking some minutes ago about the history of World Trade Center.
Yes.
And I was telling you a story I have that I think is a good way to show what a great organization the World Trade Center Association is. How flexibility is important for this kind of organization. Flexibility is important for any of the companies in which we work or any of the enterprises we may start. Mr. Guy Tosoli was the first CEO of the World Trade Center Association. I met him in Uruguay when he came to launch the first tower of World Trade Center Montevideo. And he told me a story very important which shows the kind of organization we have in the World Trade Center Association. In the 60s, this association was born. One of the first countries to come into the association was Taiwan. So we had the World Trade Center Association, World Trade Center New York, which was at that time the USA, and World Trade Center Taiwan. Sometime later, a delegation from China visited Mr. Tosoli and asked him to enter the organization. Tosoli said, okay, but we have Taiwan. You remember, China does not get into any world organization where Taiwan is, so the Chinese said, you have to take them out. And Mr. Tosoli said, I have been working with them for a lot of years. We are not going to take out Taiwan. So China remained out. Some years later, they came again, and again, they came out. And at that time, the board of the World Trade Center Association got together and said, we have to look for a solution. And at that time, they said, the problem is China and Taiwan. The problem sometimes is countries. The problem is not cities. Cities are more like people, like us. Less things about politics, less things about conflicts, more trade, more get together, more visit each other. And at that time, the World Trade Center Association changed from an organization of countries to an organization of cities. And that not only allowed World Trade Center, the Chinese to get into the World Trade Center Association and the Taiwanese to remain there, but also allowed to continue growing through the world. It was the first organization that had together Chinese and Taiwanese in one organization. So I think it's very, I like that story to tell what kind of organization we are in. And now I want to ask Scott, which is the one who has to speak, to tell us how this organization was born, how it started, how this about cities and countries worked.
Sure. I mean, Carlos, it's a very interesting story you tell because it was a very fortunate decision that back 45 years ago, the decision was made to tie our World Trade Centers into cities, because cities have since emerged, of course, to be the economic leaders for countries all around the world. And the interesting part is that cities don't often have the economic wherewithal or the taxation base that countries or states have, but most of the economic activity comes from cities. So we are one of the only economic development trade organizations that are connected to cities. So we have over 300 members in 300 cities around the world in 90 countries. And our focus is to promote trade and investment, cross-border trade, through development of real estate and services. And our members are very active. We try to engage on two levels. One is collaboration, and we look to our World Trade Centers in individual cities to build a collaborative model on what is happening and what is special about that city. But then there's also got to be a trust factor, because you're reaching out to your counterparts around the world. So I think we're a very unique organization. We come at a time when cities are seizing the lead on economic business development, and I think we're an important tool to facilitate.
How did the World Trade Center Association get to be so important, so huge, so developed in all the world, all through the world?
Well, when we started, and we're entering our 50th year, we had a bit of a cookie cutter type model that we used. And that was, we wanted every World Trade Center to be the same, not unlike a lot of associations might strive for. And it was all around real estate and services. I like to say that over the last 20 years, however, we maybe inadvertently disrupted ourselves to some degree, because we realized that in order for us to be successful in cities and for us to be truly innovative, that we really needed the World Trade Center in the city at the grassroots level to decide how they were going to operate and what kind of a business model they were going to have. So in some cases, we have World Trade Centers who thrive on conferences and conventions and trade shows. Some are experts on trade education and trade missions. In the case of Montevideo, you have your free trade zones, and that is a true innovation. So that came to us through the World Trade Center in Montevideo, and it's an important innovation for our members. So that, to me, that's the biggest differentiator, is that we've allowed our members to excel at whatever business model works in their city, because of course every city in different countries, different cultures is going to be very, very different.
World Trade Center was not only flexibility, it's also resilience. Tell us, please, how the 9/11 issue hit World Trade Center and how World Trade Center Association rose from that moment and continued growing.
Well, of course, that was a very tragic occurrence. I was not at the World Trade Center in New York. I would have been at the World Trade Center in Halifax and Nova Scotia in Canada. That's the east coast of Canada. And coincidentally, we had over 8,000 citizens landing in Halifax as a result of grounding all of the planes worldwide. We had to take care of them at our facility for the course of a week. But the event itself, of course, was very tragic, and everyone's well aware of it. What I like to say is that we used it as an opportunity to move on and to grow our organization. And I think at a time when there's a lot of disruption happening around the world today, the whole idea of interpersonal connection, trust, collaboration is even more important today. And unfortunately, events such as New York or Paris or many others just highlight the fact that we need to continue on business, we need to continue on to trust and work together across borders, and it's the way of the world.
How did the World Trade Center Association change through the decades? What has been changing? How has been going forward?
Well, I think that the big learning that we had is in order for us to be truly innovative and different, we really couldn't enforce, we have standards, of course, and expectations, but we couldn't enforce the exact same model on every World Trade Center around the world. Because innovation comes from the grassroots level and comes, in many cases, from SMEs around the world. So there needs to be a way for small companies and organizations to thrive at a city level, and then hopefully we as a network can learn from that innovation. And so by being less regimented on how our World Trade Centers operate and being more open to change and innovation, I think we've created a very unique model. So today, even though we have 300 World Trade Centers in 90 countries, you will not find many World Trade Centers that are identical. You know, first and foremost, they reflect what exciting, innovative things are happening in their business community. And then, of course, they all share the common goal of connecting globally.
When you go into the web page in World Trade Center, you go to the association to New York, you find that they say, we grow trade. And trade is understood as trade, as we know, but trade is understood as a way to link people, to link countries, as a way to make grow peace, to make grow smart communities.
Yeah.
How does the World Trade Center Association helps to grow trade? How do you work in that thing?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things, we just produced a report last year. It's an annual report. It was our first year. We're going to follow it up again this year with Foreign Policy magazine. And we did quite an extensive research piece on what makes cities grow around the world and what successful trends are happening. And we've tied in our World Trade Centers and which World Trade Centers are engaged in innovation. We did some research that showed that our World Trade Center cities and members around the world are very concerned with the level of disruption that's happening right now. In fact, 71% of our members expect there to be a slowdown in investment as a result of the questioning or disruption that's happening around the world. So that's a challenge for us, and that's a challenge that we can only meet by working together more closely. But on the other side, we also uncovered that when you look at small and medium-sized enterprises around the world, they're responsible for over 70% of jobs that are created and responsible for over 50% of GDP. But when you look globally, you'll see that SMEs only engage in international trade to the extent of about 10%. So there's a big gap, and I think that's a gap that we can help fill. And we can do that because our members are engaged with SMEs in their own cities. And I think by making those connections that we can help make a contribution.
World Trade Center Association is a great group of entrepreneurs. And in Latin America, and especially in Uruguay, we need to promote entrepreneurship. Yeah. How do you think we should work? What would the World Trade Center Association could do to help us promote entrepreneurship?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, first of all, the WTCA is very alive and well in Latin America, and then when you tack on even Mexico, you know, we have over 50 licenses in Latin America. We have an additional 12 in Mexico. Our Latin American members are very entrepreneurial, as you point out. They're very engaged. The first regional meeting I went to after I became CEO was in your facility in Montevideo just over a year ago. And I was surprised at how enthusiastic and positive our members were in Latin America. In fact, when I went to additional regional meetings in China and North America, I always used Latin America as an example of I thought, our strongest, most enthusiastic network. So that's a good thing. We've got, in a country of Uruguay, it's not an overly large country, we've got 3 World Trade Centers in Colonia and a new one that's emerging here in Punta del Este. And to have 3 World Trade Centers in a country this size is very encouraging. So I think the way that we can help is to continue to support through services, through promotion, through brand development, and ensure that our network is solid so that when you reach out to other World Trade Centers on behalf of your companies, that you're able to provide value to your members.
Okay. Last year you were in Uruguay, Montevideo. You visited World Trade Center Montevideo. Yeah. What do you think about the project we did? You like it? You feel great there?
So it's my 3rd trip to Uruguay, and so you're right, Montevideo last year. I was very pleased and very supportive and impressed with the quality of the facilities that you've built. But in addition, I mentioned earlier the innovation of free trade zones as having a building and a second building coming up. And that's what I'm always looking for, because innovation comes from the grassroots up, and it comes from what's happening in the city itself. And my big takeaway has been the innovation of the free trade zone and how we're able to possibly connect other free trade zones around the world. Now, some of our buildings, licenses like Trieste in Italy, have partners with free trade parks, but I think the whole idea of further developing that free trade zone across the entire network is an opportunity. And I mentioned to you earlier today that we have a cluster of groups we call member advisory councils. And what we do is when there's a subject matter that's important to members, we encourage those members to meet and collaborate, and then we get it out of the way. And an example of that would be the World Trade Center in Harbin, China, which is going to be the largest World Trade Center in the world. It's over 2.3 million square meters. It's a complex. It's the size of a city. It's the size of a small city. What they've done is they are taking a lead for China on food and agricultural innovation, and they've got industrial parks and innovation parks and schools all built into the World Trade Center. So they wanted to take the lead in setting a member advisory council for agriculture. So we have 50 World Trade Centers who meet. We had a phone call last week. We'll meet again in Mexico. We'll meet 1 to 2 times a year strictly on agriculture. So there's an example of how especially can move throughout the network. I think we have an opportunity with the Free Trade Zone to do the same thing with Montevideo's leads to source out other World Trade Centers that want to specialize in free trade zones and see if we can get a good discussion happening at the World Trade level.
Okay. You just arrived this morning to Punta del Este. You still haven't seen too much. This is a summer resort. What do you think about building a World Trade Center here in Punta del Este?
I think it's a wonderful opportunity. You have a very beautiful city, of course, and I know tourism is a very, very big industry, and you're looking to develop other industries, and in the outlying areas, agricultural and tech and finance is emerging. I think that a World Trade Center as a physical location gives you an opportunity to help champion what's happening in the local market. And that goes back to that earlier comment I made on innovation. So I think the first step is to have a physical presence and to put the call out to companies, especially SMEs who are interested in engaging, to cluster and work around the World Trade Center and develop some new ideas and concepts that can come from this market. But of course leverage the network worldwide for those companies that want to trade and develop business across border.
How do you see the future of the World Trade Center Association? Let's look at the future. What do you think about it?
I'm very excited about it. And of course, maybe I would say that even if I wasn't, I'm not sure. But I can tell you that when I look around the world these days, I see that there's a lot of disruption. I see that governments aren't doing a particularly good job at working together necessarily. And a lot of the normal diplomatic connections may not be as strong in the future as they have been in the past. So I think it's really important that any network that allows businesses, especially SMEs, that don't have the infrastructure to develop their own network, have a vehicle to connect so that cities who are leading the charge for economic development and business development and the SMEs that reside in those cities have a vehicle to connect cross-border. And I think that the World Trade Center Association is a vehicle to do that.
Okay. Scott, thank you very much for coming to Uruguay
Good.
and for sharing with us all your experience. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Good, thank you.
Thank you very much.